In the high-stakes world of chess, the gambit is a daring move that sacrifices a piece to gain a strategic advantage. But what happens when this same principle is applied to the game of global politics? Imagine a leader who, like a chess grandmaster, uses cunning and strategy to outmaneuver their opponents, turning the tables on the world's most powerful nations. From the battlefields of the Middle East to the corridors of the United Nations, these leaders have proven that brains can be just as powerful as brawn. Let's take a closer look at the masters of the geopolitical gambit and how they've managed to bring the world's superpowers to their knees. Here are top 5 leaders who, through a combination of cunning, strategy, and sheer willpower, managed to force the United States to reconsider its approach, showing that brains, sometimes more than brawn, are what truly dominate the global stage. At number 5, we have Fidel Castro from Cuba. Fidel Castro's revolution and leadership of Cuba posed a direct challenge to U.S. dominance in the Western Hemisphere. After overthrowing the pro-American Batista regime in 1959, Castro turned Cuba into a communist state, drawing the ire of the U.S. His defiance reached its peak during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, when the Soviet Union installed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. The U.S. was forced to the brink of nuclear war, showing just how a small, determined leader could outmaneuver a global superpower.
Fidel Castro was the world's longest-serving dictator. Although the United States often tried to get rid of him, in the end, Fidel Castro outlasted 9 American presidents. He was a constant irritant to them, a communist leader right on their doorstep.
At number 4, we have Mahmoud Ahmadinejad from Iran. As Iran's president from 2005 to 2013, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad took a bold stance against U.S. hegemony in the Middle East. His defiance on the world stage, especially with Iran's nuclear program and support for anti-U.S. factions like Hezbollah, challenged U.S. influence. Ahmadinejad's rhetoric, including his notorious denial of the Holocaust and call for the destruction of Israel, enraged the West. Yet he leveraged Iran's strategic position and alliances to resist U.S. pressure, effectively challenging American power in the region. At number 3, we have Hugo Chavez from Venezuela. Chavez, the charismatic and controversial leader of Venezuela, used the country's vast oil reserves to directly challenge U.S. interests in Latin America. Through his campaign of 21st century socialism, Chavez sought to undermine American influence across the region, using oil wealth to fund anti-U.S. governments and movements, including those in Cuba, Bolivia, and Nicaragua. His defiance, particularly through his alliance with Iran and Russia, put the U.S. in a difficult position, especially as Venezuela grew closer to forming a bloc of nations opposed to American imperialism.
After more than a month of silence, there's finally been an update on the health of Hugo Chavez. Venezuela's been languishing in political limbo since Chavez underwent a 4th round of surgery for cancer in Cuba back in December.
At number 2, we have Vladimir Putin from Russia. Putin has consistently played the geopolitical gambit with precision. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia's diminished power was swiftly restored under his rule. By manipulating crises in Georgia, Ukraine, and Syria, Putin repeatedly forced the U.S. to reconsider its foreign policy. His 2014 annexation of Crimea and support for separatists in eastern Ukraine directly confronted U.S. interests in Europe, leading to economic sanctions and a new Cold War-like standoff. Putin's strategic alliances with China and the Middle East, as well as his cyber warfare tactics, have put the U.S. in a position of vulnerability, making him one of the most formidable opponents to American influence in recent decades. Before we reveal the ultimate master of the geopolitical gambit, if you found this deep dive into history fascinating, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another episode of how power, strategy, and sheer will collide on the world stage. Now let's take a look at the leader who truly changed the course of history and brought the United States to its knees. At number 1, we have Mao Zedong from China. Mao Zedong, the founding father of the People's Republic of China, is the undisputed master of the geopolitical gambit. After leading the Chinese Communist Party to victory in 1949, Mao turned China into a major rival to the United States. During the Cold War, China's dramatic leap toward global power, including the Korean War, the Taiwan Straits crises, and the eventual opening of diplomatic relations with the U.S. in 1972, forced the U.S. to shift its strategy on a global scale. His leadership created a strategic superpower that continues to challenge U.S. dominance in almost every arena, from economics to military might, and is arguably the most significant geopolitical shift of the 20th century. As we've seen, these leaders were not just players on the geopolitical chessboard, they were masters of the gambit, using strategy, wit, and sheer will to force the world's superpower to rethink its approach. From Fidel Castro's defiance in Cuba to Mao Zedong's transformative impact on China, each move reshaped the global stage.
In September 1976, Mao Zedong dies. The gang of four are arrested, and their plot to control the country stopped, marking the end of the Cultural Revolution.
What does the future hold as more players enter the game? One thing is certain. In the world of international politics, it's not always the biggest army that wins, it's the sharpest mind.